Live from the SABC's Auckland Park studios, welcome to this midweek edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko, and on the show tonight...
The strategic goal of this government is to reduce poverty, inequality, unemployment in pursuit of better life for all.
But how does the Finance Minister and his team's thinking do that? Our panel for this evening looks at whether his pronouncements today do indeed speak to the plight of millions of South Africans who make up South Africa's poor. But first...
I stand before you today, no longer the mayor of this great city.
A day of drama as another Metro mayor bites the dust. We get perspectives from the Gauteng chairpersons of the ANC and the DA following Ekurhuleni Mayor Tania Campbell's ousting. The Watchdog starts now. Former Ekurhuleni Mayor Tania Campbell has expressed disappointment following her ousting as Ekurhuleni Mayor. She says the DA will, however, not give up the fight.
I stand before you today, no longer the mayor of this great city, but a leader of the opposition party within council. While we're clearly disappointed that the coalition of corruption succeeded in bringing an end to the good work and the hard commitment and driven commitment of the multi-party coalition, we accept that we have an equally important role to play from the opposition benches. The residents of this great city deserve nothing less, and we will not give up the fight. The multi-party coalition has spent 10 months working to undo the damage done by the ANC over the past 2 decades, 21 years. We have managed to achieve a number of successes and have been able to bring changes for the better to the lives of many of our residents. From the opening of Skills Centre in Vosloorus to early childhood development centres in Palm Ridge and Katlehong, from electrifying 1,367 households with previously had no power to installing over 48 water points, from cleaning and rehabilitating 112 illegal dumping hotspots to more than 48 kilometres of roads being rehabilitated.
Ousted Ekurhuleni Mayor Tania Campbell speaking to journalists after following her ousting. Well, with me in studio, I have the ANC's Gauteng chairperson, and that's Mr. Panyaza Lesufi. Good evening, sir. Thanks very much for your time.
Well,
you're obviously delighted. Your plan is coming together nicely.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. No, we went to a conference and we agreed that we need to renew the African National Congress in this province. And one area of service delivery obviously is local government. We assessed our performance and we felt we can go and negotiate with other political parties. And we did that. We got Joburg back and we're on the verge of finalizing Ekurhuleni. And then we'll then be in a position to follow up in Mogale City and Tshwane. And I think on the basis of that, we'll be ready now to service our people in a manner that assists them.
So of course, as everyone knows, in Johannesburg, there was the court ruling, which you're now reeling from, which put a spanner in the works.
It's a temporary inconvenience, to be quite frank. The parties that support us in Johannesburg, all of them voted with us today in Ekurhuleni, so we are confident. We are quite aware that that programming committee that the court found that it didn't do its work properly, it was basically sabotage because people knew that we ousted the speaker the previous day, so it will be easy to oust the mayor and therefore made things difficult for that programming committee. Now that the programming committee is chaired by a different person, we're quite convinced that the programming committee will be convened and will table that motion after consulting with our coalition partners, and we can be in a position to get job back.
So
but it's not about taking municipalities, if I have to say it. It's about repositioning the African National Congress to be a political party of choice for people of Gauteng.
So it's a matter of time before you get even Johannesburg back. She calls you Tania Campbell, that is the now ousted mayor of Ekurhuleni, the coalition of corruption, saying it's all you're about, getting your hands back on the till.
I think that line is overused and it's tired now. To be quite frank, we gave them a municipality when they took over that was having a positive bank balance. Where are they now? They have to choose paying salaries or to pay Eskom or rent water because their finances are in trouble. We gave a municipality that had a clean audit. Where are they now? We gave them a municipality that was servicing all our people regardless of where they stay. Where are they now? They're choosing privileged areas, not servicing other areas. Check the number of potholes that are there now. So they can insult us and say whatever they want to say, but in the absence of evidence, because if you say people are corrupt, place the evidence on the table. And the last time I checked, the Prevention of Corruption Act, it put the onus of the person that is making an accusation to provide evidence. And in the absence of that, you are in breach of the law and you can be arrested for that. So we don't want to enter that debate. I think it's somebody's crying over spilled milk. We'll move over and go and service our people. We're meeting with our coalition partners from tomorrow to consolidate our approach for the next 7 days, and we'll take it from there.
Of course, I mean, South Africans have seen this movie playing itself out many a times before, not only in Johannesburg, Ekurhuleni, in Tshwane, Nelson Mandela. You know, we've seen this movie all over again. And as the people of Nelson Mandela will tell you, the people of Tshwane and how the people of Ekurhuleni will tell you, what they're worried about or concerned about is the fact that this toing and froing, the drama, you know, that precedes and that follows these motions of no confidence is actually detrimental to service delivery. It affects them very negatively. There's just never stability. And the question that has to be asked is, when you go into this coalition, perhaps there has to be a rethink, you know, of how you enter into these arrangements or these marriages. Some people say they are marriages of convenience. You know, in other words, what are they about? Do you get into them saying, okay, this is what we're going to do together. This is how we're going to do it. These are the outcomes.
No, I share your sentiments, strongly so. I'm one person that believes that this instability actually is chasing skills away from our municipalities. Do you think we'll get the best chief civil engineer to work for a municipality that is so unstable? Surely not. Do you think we'll attract the best minds, either in the finance or infrastructure services? Surely not, because people want to work for an employee that they know it's reliable, dependable, trusted, and there's consistency. In the absence of that, we'll lose many things. We'll lose investment. There's no business that will want to invest in municipalities that are so unstable. But you can't have a minority government, because in Ekurhuleni we're the minority government, and minority can't rule over the majority. And I mean, that's a clear fact. That's a democratic principle. They know themselves that they had a minority government, and therefore, to stabilize it, you need a majority government. I don't think that it's bad. But unfortunately,
but that's not necessarily the case, though. In other words, a majority, while it may make sense, or morally, it makes perfect sense to argue that way. But majorities don't necessarily give us stability. They don't necessarily deliver services. And we have seen that now.
I can argue differently. Where you have a majority, you don't have this changing of mayors every day. And that's a fact. Where you have a majority, you've got stable government.
But you don't have that now. You only have it for as long as your coalition partners are playing ball. And the experience has been that one or two guys decide to walk out of that arrangement, and then it's back to square one. And that's really the problem.
Let me give you a case study. Ironically, that case study is Ekurhuleni. We governed that municipality for 5 years as the ANC with the coalition partners. Did you have a vote of no confidence in that municipality? No. Did you have service delivery there? Yes. Did you have a clean audit there? Yes. So it depends. It can't be one solution for all municipalities. We really believe if you have a majority government or a government based on the will of the people, it will render its services to those people and therefore it will be accountable to them. But this thing of having more than 5 political parties where they need to account to their voters, it creates problems. It's something that I agree with you, it needs a proper framework. When we announced the provincial cabinet here, we appointed a minister for Gauteng, and one of his immediate tasks was to develop that framework. What are the do's and don'ts of coalition governments, and what is it that we can legislate so that we save our voters and our citizens out of this anxiety and frustration, if I have to put it that way.
But what do you think should go into that, though? Because the key issue here, it would seem, is that these marriages have no rules of both engagement, but also beyond engagement. What then happens when you decide to get together? But there's also no transparency built into these arrangements. In other words, where the people of Ekurhuleni can say, we know why they came together. We know what they want to achieve, and that becomes binding. And where there are issues or problems, there has to be some kind of dispute resolution mechanism that will also be transparent, so that we see who the culprits, are, and people are able to judge for themselves, one, whether these things are working or not, but also who to hold accountable in the event there is a breakdown. I think that's probably the biggest missing parts of these arrangements.
As I said, I share your sentiments, but we need consistency and what I would call loyalty to the democratic outcomes. My only concern and worry is that when the ANC is voted out of power through coalition partners, people sing hallelujah praises, democracy works. But when it's the opposite, people say, no, this is not democracy, it's corruption. It can't be fair. We need to be consistent. If we believe coalition governments can topple an ANC government, then be happy. If the same happens, also be happy. Because when these coalitions topple the ANC, like in Nelson Mandela Bay, democracy is working. When it's the other way around, it's corruption. So that level of consistency does not assist us. But indeed, we agree that we need to formulate a framework. We have started that. We have put a team to start that process, including how the negotiations should be carried and for how long, because we can't just have prolonged negotiations. And when we have reached a resolution, we agree to enter into coalition governments, the nature of the agreement in which parties that are involved should sign, and also if any party wants to leave the coalition partners, how long should they serve the notice? And if there is a need for mediation, how will that mediation be operated? And we are committing as a provincial government to establish a panel of independent mediators so that at any time you can call mediators. Because some of the differences are just small things where people can just get a mediator and resolve them. So we are putting that framework. Hopefully it will assist in managing coalition government. But we call on South Africans, just be consistent. When Mpo Palazzi came back in Johannesburg, people say democracy at work. But when the ANC took her out of the municipality, people said that's the end of democracy. It doesn't have to work that way.
At least for the sake of the people of Ekurhuleni, hopefully what you say you're putting in place will indeed yield better outcomes than we have seen up until now. Thank you very much for your time. So
thanks for your time. Should appreciate it.
Of the ANC in Gauteng, Mr. Panyaza Lesufi. Now, on the line, I do have the DA's Gauteng chairperson, and that's Mr. Solly Msimanga. Good evening to you, sir. Thanks very much for your time. Your ousted mayor says, well, the coalition of the corrupt is now getting into, wants to get back, to have its hands back on their till. Sounds like sour grapes, doesn't it?
Not really. I think the ANC has got a very good track record of showing its inability to keep their hands out of the cookie jar. And, the mayor and also a number of speakers in that council had actually highlighted quite a number of projects that the Lesufi is conveniently forgetting to mention now, which has brought about the collapse, of the city's finances. There's about quite a lot of projects that had been started, not having been properly funded before even at the beginning of the new term. And even today, as we were speaking of Vuyo, the council had to then decide which of those projects are going to then be carried forward and which ones are going to be put on hold. Because again, it was an issue of how do we get quick money out of these projects? How do we start projects that cost billions of rands, like the bus rapid transport, which has cost close on 2 billion rand, but yet even the phase one of it has not been completed. We can talk about the tuk-tuk, contract and buying of the tuk-tuks in Ekurhuleni. We can talk about the fleet management contract in Ekurhuleni, and the list just goes on. And this is why we are saying that the people of Ekurhuleni, the people of municipalities around South Africa, and indeed mainly the metros around Gauteng, have said that they are tired of, the ANC corruption. And this is why we know that, this is not in any way a way in which they want to come back into government to provide services. This is all
let's
about
just say,
how do they get...
let's just say we accept that, right? That indeed is your record. I'm not saying it is, but I'm saying we accept what you have just said. Why don't you then see the need to protect that record, a positive one at that, certainly on your account? Because that seems to be the issue here.
Sorry for your... I didn't get that. The line went dead for a bit.
I'm saying if one considers what your coalition and current and former coalition partners have to say about how you're managing these coalitions, I'm saying, on the back of what you've just said, which you say is a proud record that you have not only in Ekurhuleni but elsewhere in Gauteng, in the other metros, COJ and Tshwane. Why then don't you feel the need to actually protect a good record you're saying you have?
Well, you and me have had this conversation before.
Yes, we have had, but it doesn't go away.
I'm saying to you, we need to then, differentiate between a coalition where service delivery is at the center of, how and why people coalesce, or you need to then have the kingmaker, politics where people want to coalesce because they are standing to get something. I can tell you right now, people have been promised positions in the executive, not because they are going to be able to then deliver, but they've been promised positions because, they don't have to account to anybody and they have to wonder or they have to work as quickly as they possibly can and amass as much as they possibly can. And, this is part of what I'm hoping that when we get to a legislation of some kind, these kind of things will be things that we'll be able to then, do away with. That if there's going to be coalitions, by the way, there is going to be a whole lot of coalitions going forward when you're looking at the trajectory of, the South African politics, where there's going to be coalition at the provincial level and a lot of that needs to be something that needs to be looked at in terms of what brings parties together and what needs to be done in order to then keep these coalitions stable, in order to provide services to the people.
But you and I, yes, you're right. We did have, over a week ago, we had your party's chief whip here on the program talking about the various pieces of legislation that she hopes to champion and pilot through the legislative arrangements. But you and I know that the mills there tend to grind very, very slowly. It's going to take time for something like that that to materialize, and the fact that it's going to come from your political party is going to make that process even longer if it gets anywhere. Which then takes me back to what I was asking, that what are you prepared to do? You're out of Ekurhuleni now. As the chairperson of the ANC was telling us just now, Ekurhuleni is, Tshwane is next. The question is, what are you doing actively or proactively right now to make sure that you, at the very least, try to, plug the holes, close the gaps, to see if you can get into better arrangements with your coalition partners, so that something like what happened today doesn't happen again, so that the record you were speaking of earlier can be protected?
Well, we are having conversations, Vuyo. As I'm talking to you, there's meetings that have been arranged over from tomorrow and over the weekend as well, to look at, how do we then ensure that those that have really committed themselves to coalescing around the provision of services and not just the jostling of positions, or the provision of services, not just the jostling for positions, will be able to then strengthen, the coalitions that, we do have. And this is something that, has been, been discussed even in the build-up to today. Unfortunately, as you would know, that in Ekurhuleni we were already leading, and we had always been leading a minority government, and therefore that would have happened eventually at some point. But what we now need to be looking at is, as you correctly said, is how do we then prevent this from happening further? And that means that we need to be talking to, more political parties. But again, it's not an issue of wanting to govern by all means, that at the point you also even end up having a gun held over your head in terms of what you then need to be doing in order for you to then stay in government. And this is what we had promised our voters, that, it's not governed by all means if it means that you are going to end up doing the wrong things down the line.
Well, in the case of Ekurhuleni, for example, it would have been one of the things that made it impossible for you to stay on. There is that you wouldn't talk to parties like your EFF, for example, because you believe you are diametrically, you're far apart ideologically. But that's not really my question. My question is whether on your part now, as the Democratic Alliance, given the fact that it is your FedEx, that decides or that leads in these conversations, is there a willingness, or maybe I should say, is there a change of heart or a willingness to reconsider how you've approached coalitions up until now? Hopefully you will have learned from some of the lessons these processes have given you. But has that conversation even happened? That, hey guys, maybe, just maybe, we need to relook the way we've approached these coalitions up until now, and maybe devise a new strategy. Are there such conversations taking place?
Well, yeah, these are conversations that are already happening internally and are also happening amongst the other political parties that have been part of the coalition as things stand. And as I said to you, we are engaging. In fact, we are engaging with those that have, left the coalition at this point in time. Why? Because we understand that, coalitions are unfortunately or fortunately the future of politics and
that's precisely why one is asking.
And this is why that's why I'm saying to you that we are engaging. There's lessons that we have learned. There are things that, going forward will now need to be strengthened. There are things that I think needs to be put up front in terms of, what are the expectations from each political party. And that, I think looking back at 2016, I think there's a whole lot that has been done in terms of building the coalition relations, and going forward, there's a lot that has now been learned out of this period that we're coming out of, and which will then mean that the implementation going forward will be a whole lot better.
Mr. Solly Msimanga, thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you, sir.
He's, of course, the Democratic Alliance's Gauteng chairperson, on the back of that drama we saw earlier today, where in Ekurhuleni, the Metro Mayor, DA Councillor Tania Campbell, was ousted. After the break.
The strategic goal of this government is to reduce poverty, inequality, unemployment in pursuit of better life for all.
But did the finance minister's budget speech pronouncements indeed speak to the plight of millions of South Africans who make up South Africa's poor? That's what we're looking at right after this short ad break. Welcome back. Well, the finance minister earlier delivered his budget speech, which everyone, of course, was looking forward to. But take a listen first to how he prefaced everything he had to say about what has happened, what needs to happen, but also, perhaps more importantly, what needs to go into what needs to happen if we are indeed to take this country forward.
South Africa's economy has underperformed for many years. Several long-standing structural impediments continue to hamper growth. These include unreliable electricity supply, costly and inefficient ports and rail networks, crime and corruption, weak state capacity, and high levels of material concentration and barriers to entry that suppress the emergence and growth of small business. These challenges undermine our efforts to create jobs, contributing to high levels of poverty and inequality.
The background against which today's speech by the Minister of Finance was taking place to help us navigate some of those issues with a special focus on what his speech means for the country's millions of poor people. Please welcome Phelisa Nkomo, who is a development economist, but also chairperson of Oxfam. Dr. Biniza is a director at Ubuntu Economics, and Professor Bonke Dumisa is an independent economic analyst. Good evening to all of you. Thanks very much for your time.
Good evening, View, and good evening to the listeners.
Good evening to you and your listeners, or your audience.
Let me start with you, Phelisa, if I may. Just broadly, your takeaways, but also take into account, of course, that, throughout the day, our various platforms have been looking at various aspects, of the minister's speech. And right now, for the next half an hour or so, we're going to focus on just what it all means for the country's poor. But your takeaways, nevertheless.
The minister is presenting the medium-term budget speech on the background of several things that have happened between the previous budget and now. We've experienced monetary austerity measures in a form of interest rates, so that's the first issue. The second one is the increase in the unemployment statistics. Black women who are economically disengaged, young people who are disengaged, economic sectors that are actually on the decline in terms of economic growth. So in essence, in the budget speech, you then expect that the package that the minister is presenting for the medium term actually is going to start speaking to that. So I also understand the complexity and how he had to manage, because if you look at the speech, it looks at wanting to satisfy different constituencies within the economy, right? But at the same time, it doesn't zoom straight into the needs of the poor, by the way. Because the only two aspects in there that is quite interesting, still it's not even, doesn't have an additional allocation. So it's the social protection component, which is the social of those who are distressed. I think the second one, I did like the spotlight he shined on the role of municipalities. But in fact, you'd assume that amongst the key things that the minister needs to think about is the need for fiscal reconfiguration, because municipalities require actually additional funding. And the point he makes that municipalities are confronted with leadership crisis. But in essence, the leadership crisis actually needs to be resolved. So in essence, I think overall, when you look at the speech, you see the plethora of challenges he's trying, and most of the funding is going to state-owned enterprises, and you need to take interest on what the conditions of that funding modeling he's starting to actually introduce. The biggest issue, which is the last point, is the fact that the reality that the minister is confronted with is that the speech is actually postponing the structural challenges that we're confronted with. In the February budget, he was actually kind of like really calming the waters. And then you'll expect that he was meant to build on that. But actually he didn't build it. But in fact, he's just really postponing the structure. And it in fact means that we must brace ourselves for more social and economic crisis in this country.
Prof, he may have, typically, budgets, speeches, try to be, all things to all people. But poor South Africans were sitting out there looking up to this government to, do something about their plight. Did they have something to, at the very least, smile about or look forward to? Professor Dumisa?
Unfortunately,
yes.
there is an echo between you and I, so I did not get the gist of your question. So can you repeat it so that I can answer you?
I'm saying for millions of poor people, yes. Typically, budget speeches try to be all things to all people. But to a poor person who was sitting there watching, listening, did they have something to at least look forward to if they can't smile about it?
Yes, there was something that the poor had something to smile about. Firstly, let us look at the overall intention of this MTBPS. The minister wanted to make sure that he has a very well-balanced budget for the next 3 years. And for that to happen, if he had to put a lot of money towards social welfare, as many people are pushing, what would happen is then that we would have our debt to GDP ballooning, and we would have all of the international credit rating agencies downgrading us, even inside that junk status where we already are. So he had to strike a balance between this. You must remember we've got 7.4 million people who are receiving the social relief grant. And you've got another 16 to 17 million people who are receiving all other types of social welfare grants. So the money which goes to that, and which is mainly for the poor, is already a lot. But if ever you do not spend a lot of money trying to work on the things that can generate jobs, then you will be throwing good money after bad money, and you'll run out of money. That was the intention. That's why I'm telling you about the 7.4 million who are on the social relief grants, which were extended up until March 2024. So they extended for a year. That is a lot. And then with some of the other budget votes, you have something like 389 million rands, which is going to be spent on rural bridges. Who is going to be employed there? It is mostly the poor. So we must not just expect that there must be more money, which is going to be directed towards the giving the poor a fish. We must create an environment which will create a situation where they will be given the skills to fish for themselves. That is the challenge which we always have every time there is a budget in February, and every time we have the MTBPS in October.
Okay. Dr. Biniza, I mean, just to add to what both Prof and Ms. Nkomo, I mean, we're saying, in addition, I mean, the minister spoke a lot about money being given to municipalities precisely because there's a recognition that there are people who are desperate, who need services, but I mean, they may not have the money to, be able to afford water, electricity, and so on, and the government is coming in. But as several people have since pointed out, there are so many inefficiencies there. You have municipalities that can't spend. You have the instability we're talking about with my previous guests, where these services are hardly delivered because these people are busy arguing over positions and who should be in power. Dr. Biniza, can you hear me? Okay, we seem to be having a problem with Dr. Biniza's line. I mean, there are these challenges facing municipalities. I mean, COJ only last week back to square one, and today we have Ekurhuleni, and these are people to whom money has now been given. We know also the story of money that doesn't get spent there. So the intention may be there, and the minister may have delivered on the promise they made to really try and service the poor, but it may not happen.
Well, I mean, part of what probably we could be hopeful of in relation to municipalities that under the leadership of Nkosazana Zuma, she has established something called a district development model, right? And you might be hoping that the intention there is to reconfigure the planning, and the policy and the delivery instruments within the municipalities. Of course, one of the other issues, though, within all that is the capacity issue, right? It's the leadership issues, it's the infight, it's the political bill carrying within the local municipalities. So in essence, resourcing and also reconfiguration of structures may not entirely be sufficient. The key question is always whether do we have the right capacity. But there's something else around municipalities I want to ask.
I mean, why should we be hopeful that the district model is actually going to deliver the goods? Remember, in trying to resolve some of the biggies, like your ESCOM issue, electricity and municipalities, right? You've had it managed or led from the highest office in the land, and that's the deputy president being in charge of that. But have you seen, that process has hardly yielded, any, results. So I'm pessimistic about the district model.
No, it's a fair pessimism, by the way. But I think where the model is different in that, firstly, it galvanizes local citizens to participate in a collective development agenda. But also what it does is that it gives a much more impetus on what we always know, the independent development plan, and that in essence that municipalities would not be able to actually execute any plans, no policy, or spend money without actually ensuring that the citizens within that community is actually, participated into it. Of course, one of the key issues around the municipalities, which I'm not sure if the model actually addresses, is the one-size-fits approach. Give me 1 second to talk about it. You might have heard the story of Statarem some time ago where, in fact, they could not pay their workers. Their workers had to go and collect some money from collect food from some retailer because, through coupons. And the key question there for me was that, why do we apply one-size-fits-all? Because in fact, Statarem firstly is rural communities. So why do you then design your districts like, a district where you are able to collect resources? In fact, evidence suggests that people in rural areas are actually so disconnected with what's happening in municipalities. In fact, they live their lives. When they want to build a house, they develop their own plans. No one gets to approve them. When they're looking for electricity, when they're looking for a plumber, and the only time probably municipality get involved, or even, it's when they're starting to actually, put in infrastructure for water. But most of the time, people from rural communities live very independently. And you really need to think about sometimes if you need how much component of staffing budgeting that you require for starter. And the problem is, again, is the one-size-fits-all approach that we normally actually get to impose. And of course, as I'm saying that you have the right to be pessimistic about the model, but I'm kind of like positive in as far as how it's organized. I think recently the minister has hosted one of the biggest meetings, and particularly really making sure that it kind of like develops a thought leadership on what is required within municipalities. Because for me, that's quite critical. But one of the key issues though as well, it's how you then trim out the inefficiencies within the municipalities, because there's a lot of resource wastefulness, and part of it, it's linked across different spheres of government.
In fact, Prof, you know, I'm wondering, you know, when we're talking about whether, you know, poor South Africans had a reason to look forward, I mean, to smile about, you know, having listened to what the minister had to say. I'm thinking of a situation probably closer to you, or where you are, certainly. I mean, when the floods, you know, happened, and the reason, of course, the minister and his team had to revise our growth figures down is in part because of the extensive damage caused by the floods. But every day we hear of South Africans who were affected, badly affected by those floods, who have been promised all manner of relief, crying, you know, in front of television cameras, saying they still haven't gotten the things that they were promised. They are still living in less than ideal conditions. In fact, worse conditions than they perhaps were in prior to the floods. You see a Treasury washing its hands of this whole thing, as the Pontius Pilate of the Bible did. The municipality saying, oh yeah, we've had some problems, we didn't apply or didn't apply properly, and so on. So the system doesn't work in so many respects. In other words, even though the minister did boast about the fact that money has actually been set aside for relief efforts, but in many instances, it doesn't get to the people. I don't know what's going on. Dr. Biniza, I don't know if you heard me.
Yes.
Do you want to chip in?
Yes. So, look, it is a major concern, and I echo the same concern when it comes to how we're dealing with the issue of SOEs, in my view. I think the system really needs a proper cleanup, and I think although it's commendable what government is planning to do, for example, with the debt of Eskom, in order to create some more room on the balance sheet, in order to engage more of the private partners, but also to take advantage of the green climate financing, this does create a moral hazard in that, you know, the people working at Eskom have very little incentive now to improve efficiency in order to improve their productivity. And the same applies when looking at municipal service delivery. I think the system really needs a proper overhaul in terms of not only just skills, but also in order to root off whatever may remain in terms of what we were dealing with under state capture. The challenge, though, is that in every instance, the government seems to be bailing out the institutions, which is necessary, but those who have committed transgressions are going by without any ramifications for, any of the deeds that they've done. Although, for example, the poor South Africans will benefit from this MTBPS in terms of the spending on social wages and spending on social welfare, as well as perhaps whatever improvements on Eskom's reallocated debt would emerge. The fact of the matter is the biggest winners at the end of the day are those who have lent money to Eskom, who now get, government guaranteed on that debt, and also those who have benefited from state capture that has led to a ballooning of Eskom debt. And so I agree with you in many respects. The system isn't working. We do need to have a clean-up and to start seeing those who have done transgressions facing the letter of law and having ramifications for their misdeeds.
Still not a great line there to Sia Biniza, but we apologize for that. But Phelisa, I mean, many poor people have to resort to small businesses, whether it's tomatoes, sweets, on the side of the road, and they are facing all manner of challenges, ranging from being harassed and not being accommodated properly by municipalities to those who are not being paid by government departments.
And I mean, I think it's a sad situation because, in fact, informal sector and as well as small medium enterprise have really become an alternative to employment because people are actually facing structural unemployment. And there's absolute no support. So I heard the minister really as part of his diagnosis. I think the energy of the speech is kind of like really, in solidarity with the poor. But in terms of allocation of the actual resources, there was actually nothing. So in the February budget, he actually allocated 15 billion, where he was calling it bouncing back for the small medium enterprises. But in essence, we still actually don't know where is that. In fact, this is in addition to a 200 billion that was used as part, that was meant to be part of the socio-economic relief during COVID in the 18 months of the intense COVID. We still don't know, but we are aware though that a lot of women in particular would say that we actually have not had access to actually any form of support. Now, our argument mostly as heterodox economists is that let's not waste the crisis. Often when there's a crisis, there's an opportunity to deploy sufficient funding and build the economy from the bottom. You support SMMEs, particularly you use the agricultural sector. And I like that in the budget speech, he kind of like made reference that in fact, one of the sectors that they see as a critical sector to actually lift the poor out of poverty is to actually support the agricultural sector. So that could be one sector because most women participate in the informal sector through their vegetables, for example, vegetable stalls. And amongst those is the issue around release of land parcels. The other one is support for implements. Because then in essence, when you deal with that, you're dealing with two things. Firstly, you deal with the fact that South Africans are living on the edge. In fact, the poor are living on the edge. They have no access to food. So households are confronted with food insecurity. Gauteng alone, for example, 25% of citizens go to bed without food. So in essence, support for SMME is actually very critical through the procurement policy. So around the women's associations, we've been calling for a gender-responsive procurement policy, which is intended to make sure that it creates opportunities for women.
Prof, do you think there's there's enough focus on SMME as a way to really uplift the poor, certainly those who are keen, to do something with their own hands, hearts, and minds?
I don't think that there was much that this MTBPS could do to pour in even more money towards the SMMEs. So what they have been getting, they'll continue getting. You must remember that they actually have more other alternative sources of funding. This particular budget today, unfortunately, was more focused on trying to balance the budget so that we are not going to have the international credit rating agencies saying, South Africa, you are actually spending far more than you have, and we need to push you into more junk status. But I agree with you. Under normal circumstances, when the revenues are now better, as they are forecast to be at least by next year, where they are predicting a budget surplus, then we can have more money being put and allocated towards SMMEs in order to boost those budget votes which create jobs, because we do need to create jobs in order to deal with the serious unemployment situation in South Africa.
I'm afraid that's where we're going to have to leave it. Let me thank all my guests for coming through and trying to help us make sense of today's budget speech, insofar as it, of course, affects the poor. But that's our show for tonight. Do join us again tomorrow evening, same time. Have a good night.